So you're interested in buying the Canon R7 and to see if it's worth £1,300. Well, I'm here to give you 5 reasons why I think this camera is worth the money and why you should buy it. And the last reason may be surprising. So the first reason why I think you should buy the Canon R7 is because of the amazing video features you can find in this camera. It can shoot in 10-bit 422 in C-Log 3 up to 4K 50 frames per second, all internally. That is amazing for a camera of this price and size. It can also shoot in 100 frames per second for super slow motion, but that is down to 1080p. Still 10-bit 422 in C-Log 3 recorded though. C-Log 3 is great for dynamic range, however there is some noise in the shadows, but that is the same for my R6 Mark II, so that is expected. But the image quality out of this camera is amazing, especially if you record in 4K fine mode. And 4K fine mode in the Canon R7 is downsampled from 7K, so the image quality is just more detailed. However, you can't shoot this in 50 frames per second, you can only shoot it in 25p. Another thing that I love about the Canon R7 that the Canon R5 doesn't even have, and that is no record limit. There is no more 30-minute record limit, which is amazing, especially if you're a wedding videographer or if you like to shoot interviews, because you don't have to constantly come over and press the record button every half an hour. And the overheating in this camera is great anyway, so it's probably not going to overheat, especially in 4K 25, so I don't think you have to worry about this camera shutting down whatsoever when you're recording wedding ceremonies, wedding speeches, or just any interviews. Reason number 2 why I think you should buy the Canon R7 is because of the unbelievable autofocus in this camera. It shares the same autofocus features as my Canon R6 Mark II and also the Canon R3, which is potentially the best autofocus on the market at the minute. The eye track is unbelievable, and it's that good you can even choose what eye you want to focus on just by pressing the joystick left or right. It's super fast, it's super accurate, and you'll just won't have any problems at all with the autofocus for video or photo with this camera. The fact that a £1,300 camera body has the exact same autofocus as the R3, which is worth about £5,000, just shows how good value this camera is for having that autofocus. They could easily not put it in with it being £1,300 and an APS-C sensor, but they did, and that's their best autofocus, and that really just shows how good of a value this camera actually is. And reason number 3 why I think you should buy the Canon R7 is because of the APS-C sensor. Now, a lot of people out there will say, well, that's not a good thing, you want full frame. Well, in some cases, yes, you are right, full frame is superior in a lot of scenarios. However, I think APS-C can actually be a benefit to a lot of people out there, especially those who specialise in certain parts of photography and videography, such as sports and wildlife. Having an APS-C sensor basically just makes the camera cheaper overall, so you can spend a lot of your other budget on high quality lenses like a 15 to 35mm f2.8, a 70-200 f2.8, maybe a 50mm 1.2 prime. Camera lens is way more important than a camera body, so if you're spending all your budget on a camera, for example the R6 Mark II, but you've only got the kit lens or maybe a 50mm 1.8, then you're probably not going to produce as good image quality than if you was to get something like the R7 and maybe a 70-200 f2.8 or 24-70 f2.8. And not only on the price side of it, but also because the way I like to look at it is if I bought the R8, that would have been great, yes, but there is a few reasons why I didn't buy the R8, and I will link that at the end of the video if you want to watch why I bought the R7 over the R8. But one thing that I loved about the R7 and what actually made me a little bit more intrigued on why to buy it is because with it being APS-C, you get a crop factor of 1.6, which basically means if it's a 24mm focal length and you put it on a Canon R7, it's not going to be 24mm, it's going to be something like 35mm. So the way I'm thinking of it like that is that I've now unlocked more lenses from the lenses I already have, if that makes sense, because if I get my 50mm f1.8, this basically turns into like a 77mm 1.8, which is close to an 85mm prime, and I don't own an 85mm prime. It is nice to just get more reach out of your lenses because sometimes it acts as a completely different lens overall. And when I put my 70-200 on here, obviously the reach goes up to about 300mm, so it kind of unlocks more focal lengths for me. And reason number 4 why I think you should buy the Canon R7 is because it can shoot 32.5 megapixel raw photos up to 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter and 12 frames per second with the mechanical shutter. So this is why it's absolutely brilliant for sports photographers and wildlife photographers, because you can shoot 30 frames in a second, and with that autofocus like I mentioned earlier, and with that extra reach like I mentioned earlier with a 7200, you can shoot some absolutely amazing sports and wildlife photos. Now reason number 5 why I think you should buy this camera, and it might come at a little surprise to some of you out there, and that is the ergonomics. The ergonomics on this camera are absolutely amazing. The more I use it, the more I love it, and that might come at a shock because of this top back wheel. The Canon R7 ditches the bottom wheel like it's on every other mirrorless and DSLR camera. Well, they did implement this wheel back, but it's now up here around the joystick. People thought that was a weird place to put it, but the more and more I use it, the more I love it, because the way I shoot, I love having my thumb on the joystick, because that is how I move my focus point to capture my photos and my videos. Well, if I want to change my aperture, ISO, shutter speed, whatever you have that wheel set to, my hand is already there, my thumb's there, and I can change my settings instantly without having to move down to the bottom of the camera, and it just makes things super easy and super quick. However, the one annoying thing with the ergonomics of this camera is there is only 2 dials, and that is the wheel and that is this front dial on the front. There is no back dial anymore, because that is where the on, off and video switch is. I actually really like the placement of this on-off video switch, because you can turn it on, you can turn it into video mode instantly, all with one hand. You don't have to use the other hand at all. I do miss the back wheel dial, but all I have to do is press the ISO button on the top and I can change my ISO with the front dial. So all it means really is pressing an extra button when you are changing your settings, which doesn't really impact your shooting whatsoever. It's got the same batteries as my R6 Mark II, so I can share all the batteries I already own. The battery life is amazing. It lasts pretty much all day, and another reason why I love it is because it has 2 SD card slots, so you can record simultaneously to both cards. The ergonomics overall, this just feels like a full frame camera. The grip is amazing, it's big, it's light as well, it's nice to hold, it's nice to use, and just overall the ergonomics on this camera are amazing, and it's another reason why I think you should buy this camera, because the ease of use is so important when you are taking your photos and your videos. You can have the best camera in the world, but it's not comfy to use, and if it's awkward to use, the user experience is going to be really bad. If you have a camera that you love to use and you want to hold it all the time and you want to use it all the time, it just adds that enjoyment level to your photography and your videography, and the R7 really does bring that with its ergonomics. You get a lot in this camera for the money you're paying here. At £1,300, I think it's absolutely worth it, and I think this camera will be amazing for so many photographers and so many videographers out there. But it's not perfect, and even though the APS-C sensor in this camera is amazing, it's not full frame at the end of the day. It doesn't have the low light performance of a full frame camera. It doesn't have the image quality as a full frame camera. It doesn't have as good bokeh as a full frame camera, and it's not really good for using wide angle lenses because it crops in on them lenses like I mentioned earlier. But if you want all of these features in a full frame body, well, that's basically the Canon R6 Mark II. But you might say, what about the R8? The R8's full frame and it's only a couple £100 more. But if you actually want to see the reasons why I chose the R7 over the Canon R8, then watch this video next, because there's a few reasons why I chose this R7 over the R8, even though this is APS-C, and the R8 actually has the exact same sensor as my R6 Mark II. So if you want to see them reasons, make sure you watch this video next.